Deploy an application to Fly.io using Jenkins. Before you attempt to deploy an application, the first thing you have to do is get all the infrastructure set up. What if you didn't have any infrastructure at all? This is where Platform as a Service comes in. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at how you can use Jenkins to deploy and scale an application at fly.io. Here's today's starting point. I have a Jenkins LTS controller version 2.332.3, and attached to this controller, I have a Linux-based agent that has Docker installed and fly.toml. Now, throughout this video, we're going to be creating a new project. The link to that repository is down in the description. To get started, let's go over to a command line. I already have an empty repository ready to go. In fact, we'll just take a look at it here real quick. There's nothing really there, just a README and the basic get information. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be using Quarkus to create a native container image, meaning it's a container image that has a native binary inside of it. So I'm going to say Quarkus create app. We're going to use Maven. I'm giving it a name and a version. So since I'm in this directory, I'm going to have to move some files around. So let's check this out. Okay, so that created. Let's see what we have here. Everything is an app. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to move app/star up to here. So now we'll have a bunch of files closer at the top. That's correct. Let's see what's left in app. We have some hidden. So let's go ahead and move app/dot.maven to here. And we'll do the same thing with our two ignore files. So move app.getIgnore to here and move. Yes, I know there's probably a much faster way to do it, but this is okay. There's not that many to there. Okay, so now if we look inside of app, it's completely empty. We'll go back up one level. Whoops, too far. CD to fly, there we go. Now let's take a look at what we have here. So there's our app. Everything's good to go. So everything is moved up, so we're good to go there. So let's now go ahead and get rid of our app directory. Now let's open this up in VS Code. And what we're going to see here, let's zoom in a little bit, is we have all the standard files, but the one file that I'm most interested in right now is the greeting resource file, which is created when we bootstrap this project. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to replace the contents of this with the contents of something that I've previously prepared. So let me go and grab those contents. Take just a second. Here we go. And okay, so let's take a look and see what this is. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be getting rid of some stuff that's no longer needed. We're going to be inserting in the version. You'll see why a little bit later. And we're just going to be returning back text plain. So that's going to be the media type text plain. And we're going to be returning back a string. We're going to have some version information, and we're going to have some environment variables. Again, all of this is going to make more sense as we move through this video. Now, one of the things that we're going to need to do when we're setting up our project to deploy to Fly is we have to provide a fly.toml file. And we're going to need flyctl, which I have on the agent, but I also have it locally on the machine that I'm developing on. I've already created an account. All of that's logged in. In fact, we can go ahead and look at my dashboard. I don't have any applications created. We'll go to apps. There's nothing here, no apps at the bottom. And then we're going to run flyctl launch, which is going to allow us to create the new application, which is what we're going to do locally first. Now, is that a better practice or a best practice? Probably not. But for our example, to show you how to set this up, we're just going to do it this way for now. So let's go ahead and create our fly.toml file, but we're going to use our flyctl launch to do it for us. So let's go back over here, and I'm going to type flyctl launch. So it's looking for a Docker file, and that's okay. I don't have a Docker file here. Well, actually, there is a Docker file for building our image, but we're going to specify a Docker file that's already in the boilerplate. We'll take a look at that before we do it. So we're going to continue with a blank app, which is fine. What I'm going to do is I'm going to give it a name of my native app. I want to deploy it to Ashburn, so I'm going to leave that as the default. And now it wrote a fly.toml file. Well, let's go back over to VS Code and take a look at that file it just created. We can see that the app, my native app, there's a lot of plumbing here. We can see experimentals and services. All of these things are fine. The one item I want to call out is the internal port. By default, when our image is created, it's going to be exposing port 8080, so this default that it created for us is fine. Now, in order to interact from Jenkins over to fly.io, we need to have an API token. So I'm going to go into my dashboard. I'm going to click on Account, Settings, and on the left nav is Access Tokens. I'm going to give it a name of Jenkins. I'm going to create the token, and now I'm going to copy the token and keep it for myself to create a credential. Let's go ahead and go back over to our controller, Manage Jenkins, Manage Credentials. Let's go and create a secret text. Secret text, there we go. Secret, and give it the name of fly.api-token. We'll give it the same description. So at this point, I've created a token over on fly.io. I've taken that token and I've created a secret text type credential within Jenkins. Now, since we're going to be building a container image, what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to build that image and push it up to DockerHub. Now, it's not required that I push it to DockerHub, but from a best practice scenario, when I have my raw source, I want to build and package it so I have a package to deploy, and then I want to deploy. Fly has the ability, if an image exists, it will just push it directly up to the Fly infrastructure. But instead, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and use the image and have that image off somewhere else. So if I ever need to redeploy, I can go back to a specific version and redeploy an image. So again, this isn't required, but I consider this a best practice. I have a deployment artifact. I want that deployment artifact to live somewhere else, and then I'm going to deploy that artifact to a runtime environment. So let's go over to DockerHub and let's create some credentials there because we're going to need credentials to set this up. So I'm in DockerHub. I'm going to go to my account settings, go to security. I'm going to create an access token. I'm just going to name this Jenkins as well. Click on generate, and I'm going to copy my token so I don't forget it. And let's go ahead and create a credential for this. So we're still in credentials. Let's add a credential. This time for DockerHub, the credential is a username and password, but the password is going to be the value of the API token that we just created. So the username is still my name. The password is the token I just created. And the ID I'm going to use is dh-creds. So now we have two credentials. We have one for interacting with Fly, and we have one to interact with DockerHub. Now we're at the point to where we're ready to go ahead and create a Jenkins file for building and deploying the image out to the application running at fly.io. Now, how do we do that? Let's go over and take a look at integrating fly.ctl. There are two environment variables that we're going to be using. We have fly access token, which is the value of what we're going to be loading from our Jenkins credential. We also are able to use fly_app, which is setting the name of the application we're going to be deploying to. So let's go back over to our VS Code. Let's create a new file called Jenkinsfile-1. Here's the contents of the Jenkins file that we're going to be running. First off, here's our DH-creds. We're going to use that to log into DockerHub. Notice we're referencing credentials using the credentials helper within the environment block to load in DH-creds. That was the ID. Image name. The image name is going to be Darren Pope, My Native App. My Native App. Does that sound familiar? Well, if we take a look, we have My Native App. That's what's in our fly.toml. So we're tying these two things together. Image version, we're just giving it a version. Fly API token. Remember, we just took a look at this right here with our integrating Fly access token. So we're loading the credential from Fly API token into Fly API token here. And then Fly app is My Native App. That's going to be the name of the app. So this name isn't the name, but we're just using the same name so we can tie them together visually. Next up, we're going to verify the tooling, check our version of fly.ctl, do a Docker info, make sure everything is good. Since we are building a native image, we need to run this command. We'll do a Maven clean package with a profile of native, then we'll build our container image. Now, this container image, passing in, here's our tag information, but which Docker file are we using? Well, in the example that was created for us via the Quarkus CLI, we have a native micro, which is the one that we're going to use. So it's using the Quarkus micro image, building out this file, and all we're doing is we're just copying in the file that's going to be created, which is going to be some file name, my native app -runner. And that's being copied into work application. So this is going to be a smaller image. Then once we build the image, we log into DockerHub, we push the image to DockerHub, then we're going to set the region to IAD, or that was Ashburn. When we did our fly.ctl launch, it asked us which region, but if you notice in fly.toml, the value for IAD does not exist in this file. So in order to guarantee where this is going to deploy, within my Jenkins file, I am setting the region where I want it deployed. And then I'm going to use fly.toml-deploy. I am specifying an image. This gives us the ability to deploy the image that we just built up here. Let's assume for a moment that we're using a different agent that does not have the image locally. In our case, because we're building the image locally and then we're going to be running fly.ctl from that same agent, then the image already exists on that agent. However, if we were building on one agent and then deploying from another agent, then what would happen is the fly.ctl deploy would reference the image that we're specifying. In our case, it's going to be on DockerHub, and then it would deploy it out to the fly.io infrastructure. And then we're specifying now. After that's complete, we do a fly.ctl status. And then finally, in the post always, we just log out of DockerHub. So let's go ahead and commit up everything we have here. So I need to add one thing to git ignore because I am using VS Code. This DC cache is here. So let's add that to our ignore. So .dc cache. And now let's take a look at it. So we have docker ignore, git ignore, fly.toml. Here's our Jenkins file that we're going to start with. And in fact, instead of it being Jenkins file 1, let's rename it. I want to call this Jenkinsfile dash, let's call it build instead. All right, so let's go back here. So our Maven plumbing that we need, and then here's the Docker files that were created, and here's the basic job that we're running. One more thing that we need to do before we leave. Within this greetings resource test, it's doing a verification of the contents of what's being returned. And obviously, since I've made changes to this, this test is going to fail. So in this case, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and remove this body check. Okay, so let's go ahead and do that. So all we're going to be doing is checking that the status code is a 200, making sure that it responds back. Because the endpoint that we're going to be checking is path hello. So that's okay. So what we have here now is all of these things. All right, all that looks good. Let's go ahead and say commit it all, initial commit. Let's save all and commit, sync our changes up, and click OK. Take a few seconds. All right, that's done. Let's go and go back over to our controller and let's create our job. So we're going to say new item. We'll call this fly.io pipeline. Click OK. Let's go over to GitHub. Here's our repository that we just pushed everything up to. We'll click on code, copy this. Let's go back over here. Pipeline script from SCM, SCM get, paste that in. Let's change our branch to main. And Jenkinsfile-build is going to be the job we run. Click save. Now before we press build now, let's go back over to our Fly dashboard. We'll click on apps, and we can see down here at the bottom, we have my native app. There's been no versions built. The default size is a 1x, shared CPU, 256 meg, which is going to be fine for our application. But nothing's been deployed here yet, which is good because we haven't done anything yet. So let's go back over and get back over here to apps. There we go. My native app. And there's also this Fly builder falling water. We're not going to be using that. This is a builder in case we needed it. We don't need it because we're going to be doing the building ourselves and then pushing the image up to the Fly.io infrastructure under the hood when we do a fly.ctl deploy. Remember that. All of that's magically happening under the hood for you. So let's go back over to our controller and click on build now. And this is going to take a few minutes. So we're going to zoom in. And then once we're done, we'll come back and review everything that happened. Okay, so now that the job is completed, let's go ahead and scroll up top and see what everything happened here. What we can see, we did our checks for our Java version, which we needed the Graal VM. So we're at 17. Fly.ctl version is 00325. Docker info, all looks good there. We do our GU install native image. We do our Maven W clean package with the native profile. That's what takes the really long time for this. Once we get into the endpoint of that, what we see is we do our Docker build. We're specifying our image and tag, and then we're using the Dockerfile native micro. So it pulled in that image, did all of our building. We're logging into Docker. We're pushing up to DockerHub. So we see all of that there. Then we're setting our fly.ctl region to IAD, and then we're doing a deploy. Now this is where it gets interesting. We're verifying the app config, did that. It's building the image. Now notice it's saying building the image, but this is just sort of a precursor to what's really going on. Next line, we're searching for the image, Darren Pope, my native app 001 locally. That's the key part. It says, oh, I found that image. So then it pushes the image that it found up to Fly. In fact, we can see it's pushing it to the repository, registry.fly.io, my native app. Does the push there. We can see that a release v2 was created. We're waiting on IAD to get running, which it does. And then we do a flyctl status to check that everything is the way we expect it to be, and it is. And then finally, we log out. So what does this look like over inside of our dashboard? We'll go to the dashboard. If we refresh this page, what we're going to see now is my native app is now showing green. Let's size that down one notch. There we go. And we can see here that a release was done, released v0 3 minutes ago. We can see there's IP addresses, image details, all of the information that we need to see here is interesting. But the most important part is the host name. So if I was to click on this host name, open in a new tab, what we see is just our homepage. This isn't what we're really checking. This is a homepage that's baked into the Quarkus boilerplate. What I want to do is I want to check my hello endpoint. So let's go ahead and go to the end of this and type hello. And we can see all of the details for our hello. We see our version 001, which was lifted out of our POM.xml and then passed into our application. And we also see all of the environment variables that are available to us within the runtime environment at Fly. Now we see that we have an alloc ID, an app name, that was the app name that we gave it. Here's our public IP address. If we were using Redis cache, it would be available to us here. But note this, Fly region. This is how we can tell where our application is running. In this case, it's running in the IAD region. Now in my case, I live on the East Coast of the United States. So for me, IAD is the closest region to where I live. But what if I wanted to have this application running in multiple regions to better serve where my users are located? And what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring in a console to another machine. I'll tell you where it's at in just a moment. We'll do a curl and we'll check our URL. And we see this, that we get the same content. It's still showing the Fly region of IAD, but this machine is located in London. So what I want to do is I want to create another instance of my application to run specifically in London, because that's also where I have a lot of people watching my application. So what does it take to be able to run this application in multiple regions? Let's go and create a new Jenkins file to take care of scaling our deployment. So let's go back over to VS Code. Let's create a new Jenkins file. We'll call it Jenkinsfile-scale-deployment. And here's the contents for this. We will still need our API token and specifying the app. So we set our 2 environment variables. We're going to specify our tooling. The only one that we need for this case is flyctl, because I want to use the same image that's currently running in IAD to also run over in London. What we're doing is we're setting our regions. We're going to set our regions to both IAD and to LHR, London Heathrow. We're going to scale the deployment. So right now our scale is at 1. When we change our scale to 2, and since we've also specified 2 regions, so what that means is we're going to have 1 instance of our application running in IAD, and with that second one, we're going to get an instance running in LHR. And then finally, we'll do a status. So let's go ahead and save this. Let's commit it up. We'll call this scale. And then let's go back over to our controller. Let's create a new item. I'm going to call this scale. And we're going to copy from fly.io because it's the same one that we're using. We just need to change from build to scale deployment. We'll click on save and then click on build now. Now, unlike the build, this will run much faster. When we scroll down, we see our version, still the same version. We're setting our regions. So now we see the region pool is both IAD and LHR. We set our scale count to 2, so the count changed to 2, and then we check our status. Now, because we ran our status really quickly after setting the scale, then it didn't have time to react. And I didn't want to sit here within the job run to watch it scale up, because that could take a few moments. But let's go over to our dashboard. So when we take a look at our dashboard, what we're going to see a moment ago is that there was a release created. So let's go over to monitoring. Notice we have all regions. Well, we can see here that I have IAD and LHR. So if I take a look at LHR, we can see it's actually running there. And we can see that there's 1 instance running for that, 1 instance for Ashburn. And if we just select on all, all regions, there we go. Then we can see they're both green. We have one in LHR, one in IAD. What does this really mean? If we go back over to the page that I had here, so I'm running locally on my browser, on my machine on the East Coast of the United States. When I refresh this, I'm still looking at IAD. But when I go over to my console that is in London, when I take a look again at the curl line, I can now see that my fly region is set to LHR. So in order to scale, all I needed to do was set up my regions and set up my scale count to the number that I wanted to have running. Since I only had 2 regions, IAD and LHR, and I only wanted to have 1 instance running in each one, then I simply set the scale count to 2. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach out to us on Twitter at CloudBees. If this video was helpful to you, give us a thumbs up. And if you haven't subscribed to CloudBees TV yet, why not? Take a moment, click on that subscribe button, and then ring that bell, and you'll be notified anytime there's new content available on CloudBees TV. Thanks for watching, and we will see you in the next video.